Israeli, stop his fan and the millions early, brown is British Korea, no brown no Palestine. Palestine, Palestine, Palestine. Hazni aleikum ya Palestine, Hazni aleikum ya Palestine. Mar hele mrad queen hus past die skreachin Shiana F16 mar vergachtin Chavi an nada go intifada Kahatlach mroach hier san gaza Shaslet for the Lord Kamrak na pas la Hazni aleikum ya Palestine, Hazni aleikum ya Palestine. Palestine, Palestine, Palestine. Hazni aleikum ya Palestine, Hazni aleikum ya Palestine. Nalan leaf a hulan down a Isa. Abraham is Moishe, Muhammad Om Abraham, is Christa Eg Sharon. Jerusalem, Lord's east of the east, nach wat wie klapper gelach is via, Tarig jacht jacht en heen, Mevrouw de Palestine. Palestine, Palestine, Palestine. Hazni aleikum ya Palestine, Hazni aleikum ya Palestine. Palestine, Palestine, Palestine. Hazni aleikum ya Palestine, Hazni aleikum ya Palestine. Palestine, Palestine, Palestine. Hazni aleikum ya Palestine, Hazni aleikum ya Palestine, Hazni aleikum ya Palestine, Hazni aleikum ya
On Gurta Moor, the Great Hunger was a watershed moment in Irish history. It was a disaster that killed over 1 million people and caused the forced migration of 2.5 million more. It has left a scar on the Irish psyche that continues to the present day. A great silence enveloped Ireland in the wake of this tragedy. There was little or no commemoration on the 100th anniversary, but as we approached the 150th anniversary, Afri was determined that the occasion would not pass unnoticed. So in 1988, we launched the Famine Walk in the Dúlach Valley in County Mayo. This walk represents just one story of the pain and suffering experienced by people in the darkest period of our history. It happened in the spring of 1849, when 600 starving people made their way into the town of Louisbourg in search of food or a ticket of admission to the workhouse. They were sent from there to ask for assistance from the Board of Guardians, which was meeting the next day in Delphi Lodge, more than 10 miles away. They slept outdoors in Louisbourg overnight, and those who survived, some 400 people, set off for Delphi Lodge the next day. Wet and cold, they reached Delphi Lodge, where the Guardians were at lunch and couldn't be disturbed. When the Guardians finished lunch and condescended to see the huddled mass of people, they refused them relief or tickets to the workhouse. They began their weary, hopeless and dispirited return. But many died along the route and were buried where they fell. Afri has walked this road for the past 30 years to remember those people who died in Ungurta Moor. We continue to walk the Famine Road in solidarity with people throughout the world who are experiencing similar injustices today. It is a walk of remembrance, of respect, of compassion, of solidarity, and of resistance.
I'm sure many of you will remember that back in 2013, Delphi Lodge had the privilege and the humbling experience of finally opening the gates and welcoming the Famine Walk. At that time, we started to plant and have every year since trees. We plant oak trees, we plant whitethorns, and we kind of have created a small famine grove and a peaceful place at the lawn in front of Delphi Lodge, just as a sort of a sign of renewal from a very negative experience. It's a sign of, I suppose, hope. And of course, trees are symbolic, a thing of nature, good for the environment and all of that. We can't have everybody here today, which we would love to have, once again, starting to walk and keeping the memory alive, which we do. So what we're doing today is this. I have decided to plant an unusual tree, not necessarily a regal oak, but a humble, dowdy birch or a silver birch, which is, of course, a native Irish tree. And I'm not going to plant it out on the big lawn at Delphi Lodge for everyone to come and see it as like they would like to see big oak trees in the future. In a way, I'm planting it here in a kind of a quiet, beautiful part of bogland here, a little bit of dowdy birch, and there's willows and heather and whin bushes. So I'm planting this tree today to kind of symbolise ordinary human beings, what we all just are, just one of a multitude. It's a simple tree, it won't live as long as a mighty oak, but in its time, maybe at a century old, it'll weigh a ton weight, give or take, and that'll be carbon taken from the atmosphere. A more simple tree in a simple place, symbolising that we're all the same, we're all just ordinary and passing through. A slightly windy day here at the top of Dulac, here beside the cross. Hopefully when we reopen and things get back to normal in a strange way, maybe we'll all be a little bit more humble as a species. I know Delphi Lodge will open and we'll be able to welcome people back again. When that happens, you're all welcome to drop in, have a coffee, visit the Famine Grove, and please God, in 2022 we can have the Famine Walk as normal.
Gomaleshkel. Céad míle fáilte everyone. Ruairí McKiernan here, coming to you live from Lahinch in County Clare, and we're here for a true global gathering. Already we have, I see Anne Rinn down the road from me in Clare, and we have people in Wales, we have people in Donegal, we have people in Germany, we have people all over the United States. So keep the comments coming in. Tell us where you're joining from. We have Pete and Maya in Galway, with the Rileys in Detroit, Michigan. I won't get to name or mention everyone, but just to know that you're all very welcome, and that really is truly a global gathering. Obviously, for those of you that are familiar with the annual Afri Famine Walk, it usually takes place in the Dulac Valley, as you've just heard, in beautiful County Mayo. And for obvious reasons, we're not there for a second year, but we are determined and very hopeful that next year we will return, and it will probably feel like a very, very special one. And we'll also be uniting then with a new kind of Famine Walk family, people that have discovered the Famine Walk and discovered Afri in the last couple of years through this online engagement and online outreach. So whilst it has been a difficult year for many people, we've had to innovate and compromise and adjust. It also has brought some benefits as well in terms of expanding the reach, expanding the awareness, expanding the consciousness. And I suppose what we're really all about is expanding the action and the activism. And it would be remiss of me this moment to not acknowledge the terrible suffering that is happening all around the world, but particularly right now in the Middle East, and especially in what is often referred to as the world's largest open prison, which is Gaza. As people may know, that Al Jazeera news headquarter building was bombed just a couple of hours ago, and right now the people of Gaza are living in extreme terror. So if we can just hold them in our hearts at this moment, you'll see the Palestinian flag on the top of the screen. We're going to just hold their spirit, their strength, their resilience, their courage as we proceed here tonight, because I suppose on a personal level, what first attracted me to Afri and to the Famine Walk many years ago was not just the importance of remembering and honouring our ancestors and our own history and all that they have been through and all the generations since, but it's drawing the parallels with other communities, other countries, other cultures throughout history and at the moment, and that we honour Irish history as a living memory and we honour it through the spirit of solidarity. Somebody who embodies that spirit very well is Afri coordinator Joe Murray. He's been with Afri for over 40 years now and has seen many campaigns, many struggles, many triumphs and many challenges, no doubt. And he's going to now come on screen and say a few words to welcome people here this evening. And keep the comments coming in. We have Mullingar, Illinois. We've plenty of Palestine solidarity. We have Brian from Mullingar, Mary and Claire, Castleknock, Oregon, Liz in California, Monaghan, and more Inishowen. So you're all very, very welcome here. We have a wonderful lineup of special speakers, poetry, and music. So, Joe.
Thanks very much, Rory, and I'm great to be back again for our second online famine walk. As we were saying last year, it was almost an unthinkable idea that we would do the famine walk online, but we did it last year, and yeah, as you said, Rory, it became a global event, and there was always that global dimension, but maybe more so last year when people joined us from all over, from 11 countries, including many in the global south. And as you said, Rory, we are, today we are doing the famine walk online in the shadow of the horror that's happening in the Middle East. And our thoughts and prayers are with the people in Palestine and elsewhere. There's a terrible conflict in Ethiopia and Tigray as well. So there is conflict going on. And I think the important thing is that we have come through many experiences of conflict ourselves and the experience of An Garta Mór. And we must not lose that, and we mustn't lose the sense of solidarity. And that's what this event is about. It's about remembering our own suffering, but not dwelling on that, not an exercise in self-pity, but an exercise in garnering solidarity out of the suffering of our own history. So it's great pleasure and privilege for me to be part of this event, as we have been for the last more than 30 years. And, we're not doing it this year in reality, but I know there is one family, Maura Kyo and her family, who have done it today. And maybe other people will do it in the course of the summer, or do a famine walk in your own area. We don't necessarily have to travel to Mayo, but do that walk of remembrance and solidarity. And if you can link in with Afri, we will be very happy to support you in that, even in small groups or in families. So, so really, I'm looking forward to this event. We have a great lineup. Thank you, Rory, for hosting it for a second year in succession. And I just hope people will enjoy the experience, learn from the experience, and continue to, to really, I suppose, to express solidarity and to take action for justice, which is so urgently needed in the world that we live in.
Thank you, Joe. And just to say that this evening's event, or whatever time zone you're in, I'm very aware that it is not necessarily this evening, wherever people are. It's brought to you in association with great friends in Trócaire, which is one of Ireland's leading development, education and global justice and global development organisations. Not just Ireland, but one of the world's, I would say. So we'll be hearing more about Trócaire soon enough from special speaker, and indeed all our speakers and musicians and poets I feel really honoured to be introducing them all. And what I really love about Afri events is that there's a real emphasis on the arts and on the importance of music and poetry. And Afri has a way of attracting a very high caliber of not just speaker, but activists and voices of conscience and scholars as well. And one of those scholars is about to join me now, live from the United States, and that is Professor Christine Kinealy, and she will be coming on screen now. You're very, very welcome, Christine.
Thank you. It's great to be with you. Thank you.
Well, thanks for joining us. So you, Christine, people, if they do know you, they may know you. You have a PhD from Trinity, so your background goes back to Ireland in many settings, and you did a lot of research work in the UK and England and the United States, and then you're the founding director, as we're about to hear, of the Great Hunger Institute and now I have to try and pronounce the university name, and even though we practiced this, so Quinnipiac.
Yeah, that's great.
Quinnipiac University. I almost got it. I know I didn't fully.
You did.
And that's in Connecticut. And Christine, like, I was going to try and list out some of the books that you've written, but like, oh my God, I wrote one book and it nearly killed me. But there you are with your list of dozens and dozens, maybe 25 more.
Yeah.
Go on, give us the number.
I think, and people ask me, and I'm like, why would I count? But I think I'm up to 28. But somebody told me the great writer Edith Wharton, she wrote 30 books in 30 years. So I'm like, can I match that? I'm not sure. But anyway, I love it. So I'm not really counting.
And I believe you've also got a bit of a linkage with the Afri Famine Walk, and particularly one, I hope you don't mind me saying now, I'm putting you on the spot with, she knows what I'm going to say.
Oh boy. Yeah.
One Gabriel Byrne, the famous actor.
Yeah.
Go on, you might as well tell them.
Okay, so this is between us. But in 1995, I was on the walk, and if you were watching the video, you saw Gabriel Byrne, the great Irish actor. And I think Gary Whitedeer was on the walk. I think Hothouse Flowers, the journalist John Pilger. It was just an array of all these superstars. But I was staying in the same hotel as Gabriel Byrne. And the next morning we traveled to the walk together, and he had to stop. It was actually a beautiful day, and he wanted suntan lotion. So we stopped in this little whatever, and all the women of a certain age were all very excited, as was I. And Gabriel asked, would I put the suntan lotion on his face? So,
so
the fingers did not get washed.
Nobody expected to be hearing this tonight about
I'm really sorry for being trivial, but it was sort of a highlight.
And I think it's fair to say the Famine Walk is not known for its sun tanning or sun lotion requirements. Many of us have had many windswept days there as well. Could you just briefly, before you begin your talk, Christine, could you just tell people the nature of your books and maybe just what has led you to that kind of level of dedication and scholarship?
Yeah, and I think you were talking about Afri and Afri's mission, and I would see it as very much aligning with my own political alignments, because I was brought up in a family, we were Irish immigrants, we were very poor, and my parents were very politically active, and so I've always been involved in politics from teenage years. And I very much see my research and what binds my research. I've now started to research on abolition, because it is my interest in social justice. So my work on the famine very much fits into that.
Great. Well, that explains a lot. So you have a big fire in the engine there, a true, genuine passion and a lineage there as well. So I'll hand it back to you, Christine, to take it away for however number of minutes you have to share what you have. And Raj is going to be helping out, sharing some of your slides as well.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rory. Thank you.
Thank you.
So if I can just give some background, when Joe, who I've met on a number of occasions, asked me to do this talk, he asked would I speak for 15 minutes. So I'm watching the clock and talk about the famine, give an overview. And I've been researching this topic for over 30 years now, and the more I know, the more I don't know. It's extremely complex, it's relevant for today, and there's just a lot of dimensions. So I thought I'd sort of, in a way, give my personal journey and do it through PowerPoint, but very much linking it in with the issue of the Dulac Walk and with issues of social justice, and just how history has changed in my lifetime. History has really changed, and I'm sure Joe is very aware of this. We would have been 30 years ago considered to be on the fringe, maybe a bit crazy for the way in which we viewed the famine. But now I think we are the new orthodoxy. So within our lifetime, things have really come about. So I know, Raj, you're going to master my PowerPoint. Okay, so again, thank you. I am delighted to be here and to be part of a virtual famine walk. So I've done it twice. in reality, and now this is my first time doing it virtually. I do hope at some stage to do the walk again. So to the next slide, which you might recognize this. And of course, it's Dulux, and you may not recognize the woman in the foreground. And this is the great historian Cecil Woodham-Smith. Despite her name, she was a woman, and she has been my inspiration. And when I did my PhD at Trinity College in the 80s, the famine was not taught in schools. There were only 2 major books that had been written about it. There were very few memorials to the famine. I was a student before the walk had started, and there was just a really great silence, which again, I'll talk about. But this woman, she was of Irish descent. She was born in Wales, and she was actually very affluent. She wasn't a formal academic. But in 1962, she wrote what I consider to be one of the greatest books on the famine. It was called The Great Hunger. And I never met Cecil Woodham-Smith, but I did get to meet her daughter. And her daughter very graciously shared some family photographs with me. And this is Cecil about 1960, when she was researching in County Mayo. And her research took her to Dulux. And so she actually wrote about the terrible episode we are commemorating tonight. So that is Cecil Woodham-Smith in Dulux. So she brought out this book in 1962, and it was really hated by academics. At that time, there were very few universities in Ireland. They were dominated by men. Mostly they were Protestant, and they were mostly anti-nationalist. And so her book was described as being too emotional, not scholarly enough, etc. But her book went on to be a bestseller, and people embraced her book. So we get from Cecil Woodham-Smith this very early divide between academics who don't want to view the famine in any anti-British way or social justice way, and then this woman who's outside of the academy who's publishing this very engaging, very well-researched book on the famine. So that was 1962. When I came to do my PhD in the 1980s, as I said, there were only 2 major books on the famine. One had been written in 1956 by male academics in Dublin. It was very dry. They refused to engage with really major issues such as mortality. They said at the preface they didn't want to blame anybody, including the British government. But that was really the standard bearer. Cecil Woodham-Smith's book had been rejected by academics. So we had this divide, which I, as a young student, came into in Trinity College, little knowing I was going to find myself in the centre of this whole dispute. Okay, so if you go on to the next slide, please. So again, as I said, that when I was a student, there was just nothing. The famine was not taught in schools, in universities, etc. And I call it the silence of the academics, but also the silence of politicians, the silence of the media, etc. And this really has to be placed in the context of what was happening in Ireland in the 1970s, 1980s. And as you know, there was a war going on in the north of the country. And again, people didn't want to criticise the British government. And there was actually one academic in Dublin who said if we discussed contentious issues like the famine, we'd be giving ideological bullets to the IRA. So a very extreme statement, but again, that sums up some of the divisions and it explains some of the silences, which I, as a researcher, encountered. So next slide, please. And it wasn't until 1995, which was the 150th anniversary of the appearance of potato blight in Ireland, that the famine started to be recognised and revisited. And at this stage, Afri had already been doing its walk. And to me, what's really interesting is that people who were at the forefront of remembering the famine, they were not academics, they were not politicians. They were mostly people who were campaigners for social justice. And if any of you are musician fans, Rory talked about music being so important. You may remember in 1994, Sinead O'Connor wrote a rap song about the famine. And it's actually brilliant. But she was attacked by historians at the time, and they said, what does she know about the famine? But if you've nothing else to do tonight, I would urge you to go and listen to Sinead O'Connor's song on the famine. It really is brilliant. But again, just that idea that academics were not the ones who were driving this renewed interest in the famine. But what's really interesting is that post-1995, this interest has not gone away. And again, as a historian, I would always say, see it in the context of the time. What was happening in Ireland in the mid-1990s? Well, there was a cultural revival. Think of Seamus Heaney, Riverdance, etc. Even Irish pubs were suddenly all over the world. Politically, things were changing. We were on the verge of the peace process. And then financially, Ireland was changing. Ireland was on the verge of what became known as the Celtic Tiger. And suddenly people were not leaving Ireland, they were coming back to Ireland. And all these factors, I think, made Irish people, including historians, comfortable with examining this unpalatable aspect of their past. And if you recognise any of these beautiful memorials to the famine, different parts of the world, all very different in the message they're conveying, but they all come from post-1995. So again, that idea, a lot of silence followed after 1995 by a lot of activity. And we could move on, Raj. So part of that activity is publications, and excuse my vanity, but I have included some of my publications here. And my first major book came out in 1994, and the timing for me was fortunate. It was accidental, but it came out just as there was a revival in interest. My first book was This Great Calamity. It took 12 years to write, to research and to write. But at that stage, I knew what I was saying was going against the orthodoxy. And the orthodoxy that I was taught at Trinity was that Ireland, it was not really, her colonial situation was not important. Of course, I reject that. That the famine was probably inevitable because Ireland was in decline anyway. Of course, I reject that. Ireland, on the eve of the famine, was producing a massive agricultural surplus, but that food was going to feed the industrial masses in Britain. And then another of the orthodoxies, which I rejected, was that the British government did all it could to prevent people from dying. Of course, that is not true. So my first book, I went against the orthodoxy. I received a lot of criticism from the establishment, from certain commentators, one of which who was in the news this week, having just lost his job. I won't mention his name, but you might know who he is. And what was really interesting is that after 1995, people started to engage with the famine, to write about the famine. And that interest has not diminished. A great benchmark was in 2012 when the Atlas of the Great Famine came out, and that has just been put on the RTE website. And some of you may have watched a documentary made by RTE earlier this year. I think I was in it. I haven't seen it, but there just seems to be a sustained interest in the famine. And to me, what's really good is all the ideas that I embraced, and I was very much an outsider 30 years ago, now have become core to our understanding of the famine. And that really allows us to engage in very different ways, and allows us to look at issues such as food security, social justice, etc. And so the famine gains a new relevance in today's society. So next slide, please, Raj. Okay, so this is different sort of publications and different ways of making history visible. And to me, this is really interesting. So Afri, the famine walk, this is a great way of engaging people with what happened and actually taking them to the site of where this awful tragedy occurred in 1849. Just a few years ago, a National Famine Way was established, and that again tells the story of people who were forced out of their homes in Roscommon, Strokestown, Roscommon in 1847. They walked to Liverpool, 100 miles, from there to Dublin, from there to Liverpool, and then on to Canada. And about a third of them perished on the way. So that is now being remembered, and I think it very much complements the work that's been done by Afri. There's music. I think of Declan O'Rourke as very pioneering. I talked about Sinead O'Connor, Declan O'Rourke, very different. A graphic novel is a famine opera. And to me, this actually makes history accessible and visible, again, in a way that really was unimaginable in the 1980s. And so this is very exciting. It's almost like a democratization of academic studies. And again, this is the way it should be. And so on next slide. Okay, so new orthodoxies. And again, from the last 30 years, we've come to reject the old idea that Britain did all it could and that Ireland wasn't really a colony, etc. So what we now see is there's an acceptance that the British government was culpable and definitely should and could have done more. In fact, in 1997, Tony Blair admitted that. We now see food security as a humanitarian issue. We know from recent research that in any famine, but we talk about the Irish famine, women and children were the most vulnerable. We know, and again, this was not discussed when I was a student, that Protestants in the northeast of the country also suffered. If you were poor, you were vulnerable. And there were, despite, again, some of the myths surrounding Protestant ascendancy, there were poor Protestants in the north east. We now know through research on DNA that famines are transgenerational, and it's thought that it lasts for up to 5 generations. So probably myself and Joe, not so much Rory, are children of the famine, in that famine memory is still in our genes. We know there are famine victims, again, something that took a long time to admit. The Irish were victims. And we also know there are famine heroes. And I think that's something that needs to be recognised. And then something I argued 30 years ago, this famine was not inevitable. Most famines are not inevitable. Famines are not about food shortages. They are about political decisions and choices. So again, the Irish famine really teach us lessons about food hunger, food security, and famine in the world today. And the next slide. So I talked about a villain, and if any of you have studied the famine, it's very easy to identify some of the villains, and probably this man is seen as the greatest villain. And his name is Charles Trevelyan. He was a civil servant, he was in charge of the Treasury, and effectively in charge of relief. He didn't like poor people, he didn't like Irish people, and he didn't like Catholic people. And one of his main concerns was making the books balance rather than saving lives. And there's a whole debate, well, he was a civil servant, should we blame him? But having read his correspondence and having seen how influential he was, to me, he certainly was culpable. And the image you see is part of the collection at Quinnipiac University. We have a Great Hunger Museum, sadly closed at the moment, but this is painted by an Australian painter, Michael Farrell, and it's imagining putting Charles Trevelyan on trial. And the background is very interesting because in it you see a Muslim, and that represents the Sultan of Turkey, who sent money to Ireland during the famine. And you also see a group of Quakers who put their own lives at risk in order to give relief to the poorest within Ireland. And so if we have villains, we also have heroes. And if I can end on that very positive note, and if you could go to the next slide, please, and look at some of the heroes. So some of these you may be familiar with. The first man is a Polish count. He was an explorer. He explored, found gold in Australia. And when he heard about the famine, he offered his services free of charge. And he knew that Mayo was suffering very badly. And so he set himself up in Westport in County Mayo. And one of his imaginative and compassionate schemes was he devised a way of feeding school children. Every child who came to school would be given a meal every day, a suit of clothing, on condition they comb their hair and wash their hands. Very unusual, but very effective in this time of disease. And by 1848, he was feeding 250,000 school children throughout the west of Ireland. So he saved countless lives. Unfortunately, at that point, his money ran out, and Charles Trevelyan decided to close the scheme down. And if we could go back to that slide, please, so I can see my next hero, the Choctaw Nation. The Choctaw Nation, I think we've lost the slide, but anyway, the Choctaw Nation, you may know, especially if you're American, had been forced on the Trail of Tears. Sorry, that's the one, thank you. In the 1830s, from their rich lands in the Mississippi to the poor land in Oklahoma, many of them had died. And in 1847, they heard about the suffering of Ireland. They convened a meeting and sent $170 to Ireland. Their generosity spurred the Cherokee to also give money to Ireland. And for Irish people, that's very much a sacred memory. And you probably know that there's now a memorial near Cork, in Cork, Middleton, honouring the memory of the Choctaw Nation. The woman in the middle is Asnath Nicholson. She was American, an abolitionist. She'd been to Ireland in 1844 to give out Bibles. She returned in 1847 to give relief not Bibles. But importantly, she provided a searing eyewitness account of what she saw. Again, she was very, very critical of the British government and of absentee landlords. The man in the corner is an English Quaker, James Hatchuk. He came to Ireland at the end of 1846 as a man in his 20s, and he set himself up again in County Mayo, one of the poorest areas and one of the worst affected areas. He stayed in the Erris area, very, very poor area in Mayo, and he gave out relief. And we would call him now a frontline worker. He did it at great risk to himself. Again, he left very powerful eyewitness accounts. Again, he was very critical of Irish landlords to the extent that one threatened to shoot him. And James Hatchuk did many great things, but he came back during the forgotten famine of 1879 to 1882. And again, he based himself in the west of Ireland. And this time he helped people to emigrate, but to emigrate in a way that was dignified and gave them resources. So a man who truly loved Ireland and felt great compassion for the poor of Ireland. And then finally, somebody you might know, Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass arrived in Ireland in August 1845. Around the same time as the Potato Blight. And he came to Europe because he was in danger of being recaptured and returned to enslavement. And he was in Ireland at the beginning of the famine when nobody really knew this was going to be a devastating 7 years. But when he was back in Britain, he sent money back to Ireland to help the victims of the famine. And interestingly, he sent it to a ladies group in Belfast. And one of the leading lights of that ladies group was Mary Ann McCracken, sister of the great Henry Joy McCracken, who'd been executed in 1798. And she was almost 80, but she was very energetic in terms of giving relief. And she insisted that it was not to be given in any sectarian way. She herself was a Presbyterian. So that is the heroes of the famine. So I wanted to end on a positive note. And that's just an overview. And I think now the final slide is thank you. And do you have any questions? I think you're muted, Rory.
Thank you so much, Christine. That was powerful, truly, truly powerful. Could you just, that first slide you had up, that fairly iconic picture, could you tell people where we might find that if we wanted to source it, or is that's a tricky one?
It's a family photograph, and the family, Cecil Wooden Smith's daughter shared it with me. So it's not really in common usage, but I love it, and it's so clearly do look. And it, again, this is a historian who is doing her research to such a great extent she actually visits the sites of suffering.
Wow, that's amazing. So in all of your work, Christine, you have almost, it's not quite full circle, but someday we might come there in terms of really, I guess really that's not the correct turn of phrase, but what I'm trying to get at is the journey that you have witnessed in terms of public understanding and consciousness around the famine, which hasn't quite fully gone away, because as recently as last week, we came in, we've heard from somebody that wasn't best pleased about Afri holding this event even, and it seems to be something around shadow and shame. Is that a theme that comes up for you in your work?
Yeah, I think the shadow, I think the shame, I think some of that was broken in 1995. But I think, again, there's almost this conservative element that really doesn't want to engage with aspects of Ireland's past in terms of social justice. And again, it's so much in the news this week, so it made me rethink back to when I first brought out my book and the way in which I was attacked for some of the things I said. And it's, again, to look at Ireland politics, people who are happy that there is a border in Ireland, who don't care about issues of social justice, who would probably not be supporting Palestine. To me, they come from a very different place politically. And they use the famine and Ireland's past in a way that, again, I was thinking about it when my book came out in the 1990s, and I didn't use the word revisionist, but we talk about the whole revisionist debate. And when I was a student, when my book came out, revisionists, who are these anti-nationalist commentators, not always academics, but commentators. And I forgot what I was going to say. Sorry, but revisionists, they were very, very powerful, and they're still there. They haven't gone away. In some ways, they've reinvented themselves. But what I think is different is that the general public and most academics now would reject that point of view. In the 1990s, they were absolutely dominant in Irish universities and in Irish media.
There are various comments and questions which unfortunately we won't have time for. Perhaps we'll need to do a whole Christine special some evening if you will be up for that. But just I'll take one here before we move on. It's from Liz Sullivan. She's wondering about, this is the comment on screen now, can you say more about the famine being transgenerational, or I guess intergenerational?
Yeah, so the person who's written about that is Una Walsh. And I think I'm propping up my computer. Una spoke at a conference we had at Quinnipiac, sorry, my computers, and it led to a publication, Women, the Great Hunger. So so Una's essay is there. So Una Walsh, OONAGH, Una, yeah. So, but I don't know if anybody else has written about it so much, but it's very, very powerful. And again, she examines it. And we know some of the research that was done in the wake of the Second World War. Audrey Hepburn is the famous example of starvation being transgenerational, etc., because the research was done in Belgium. But we know that trauma and famine, it gets in the DNA, and it's carried by both men and women. It used to be thought it was just women, but it's men and women. So yeah, Una Walsh is really the expert on that.
Okay, that's definitely one to look up for people, and we can follow up with some resources as well in a follow-up email. So I'll take this final one from Patricia there. What was the name of the Muslim from Turkey who sent money?
Oh, he was the Sultan. He was only the Sultan. And his name is Abdul Mesid. And he was in his 20s. And, the story is fascinating. And we know, so Queen Victoria, she sent £2,000, and she really did it for political reasons. She was able to do so by the Prime Minister. But Abdul Mesid, he offered to send £10,000. And again, the correspondence in the National Library in Ireland. So, we can verify it. But he was told by the British ambassador in Constantinople, as it was then, that it would defend British royal protocol if anybody gave more than the British monarch. So he was asked to reduce his donation, which he did to £1,000.
Wow. And so it continues, Christine, in many of the struggles and affairs of the world today, and we see them playing out, and hence the importance of keeping this knowledge alive and keeping the spirit alive. So on behalf of everyone, I want to thank you for an incredible presentation, but also the legacy of work that you've done on behalf of not just the Irish nation, but the Irish diaspora, and going back hundreds of years. It truly is, I think, a journey of courage as well, because you obviously did a lot of this at a time when you had to face down some of those aforementioned people that shall remain nameless at the moment. They're getting enough of their own airplay. But look at it, I think it's a testimony to how activism and how any form of dedication, if you hold at it long enough, we often break through, and that we are doing. So, Goramila Maga, thank you again, Christine.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you, Rory and Joe. And Rod, thank you.
Thanks again. So, folks, we're going to be going now. We're going to move from Connecticut into the west of Ireland, and specifically the northwest of Ireland. We're going now to County Sligo, and I believe close to the Mayo border in County Sligo. One of Ireland's finest, and certainly, I don't want to use the term up and coming, but certainly she's going to be, you're going to be hearing lots more about Brídín. She has a new EP out. She recently had a very successful TV performance on the Tommy Tiernan show, which people can probably still watch back. And I think she has a very special guest with her tonight. Maybe you want to tell us who's that making a guest appearance.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much, Rory, for having us. We're honoured to be part of this. So I'm Brídín, and I'm a contemporary harpist and composer from the west of Sligo. And I'm here with my mother, Aileen Donaher McGowan, and she's joining me today. And we're gonna play two of my tracks from my EP. So I'm inspired by the nature that's around me here in Sligo, and this one we're going to start with is called Northwest, and you can almost imagine something growing from nothing and up into a lovely big tree or something. So almost like the west of Ireland as it is today. So I hope you enjoy it. And our second and our last piece is going to be called The Salmon's Tail. And I hope you enjoyed it. And thanks so much again for having us on. We're absolutely honored to be here. All right.
Wow, I think I'm just mesmerized. I've gone into a trance here. So that was amazing. That was amazing. Thank you so much
Thanks
to you
so
both.
much, Rory.
Beautiful musicianship and otherworldly, fantastic. Beautiful,
much.
beautiful. And obviously the harp has such resonance when it comes to our history and culture and the famine as well. So thank you both. And hopefully we'll get to see you in person next year in County Mayo at the Famine Walk.
Oh, we'll be there.
Slán.
Slán.
Okay, folks, thank you everyone for all your comments. Thanks to our wonderful speakers, for our music, for everyone joining in from all around the world. It really does feel very special to have this kind of global Irish diaspora, not just the diaspora, but people from all over Ireland and all over the world. So we're going to keep things moving along here. And my next guest this evening here is Blanca Blanco from Trócaire, and she's going to be coming on screen now. Hello,
Hi.
Blanca.
Hi, Ruairí. Hi, everyone.
Great to see you. Thanks for joining us this evening. Blanca, you're the interim head of programs at Trócaire. Could you tell us a little bit about that role? But before you do, maybe a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and how did you end up in Dublin and specifically then in this type of role?
Okay, I'm originally from Catalonia, and I came to Ireland, I don't know, 25 years ago as an Erasmus student. And I went to college in Kinealy, in the Development Studies Centre. That's how I met some of the Afri people at the time, including Joe. And after that, I was working for a small organization on development education. And my passion had always been to go to Central America, well, Latin America, but an option came with Trócaire to be an intern in Honduras, and I went thinking I was going for a year experience and then coming back to Ireland, but I ended up almost 16 years in Central America.
Wow.
And came back a couple of years ago, back to Ireland to work on resource rights and human rights defenders, and I'm currently overseeing the programs that we have in over 16 countries where we work.
And Blanca, one of those countries that Trócaire works in, or one of the regions anyway, is Gaza, which is obviously very much in our minds and in our hearts right now. Could you say a little bit about the work that Trócaire does there?
Yeah, we're working with partners on human rights protection and defending human rights for the people in Gaza and also in West Jerusalem. So, I mean, some of those centers, they monitor human rights violations. Some of the partners provide psychosocial support. I mean, you can imagine that the people of Gaza and the people of Palestine are going through, I mean, not now, because I mean, this is history repeating itself, but, you know, over decades. So psychosocial support and also promoting, you know, supporting women's empowerment and the protection of children.
Wow, it's never more important. And like, so you said 16 countries. I think like there's something in that as well about a lot of this work not necessarily being based in Ireland, but having a very strong kind of support from the Irish people, which I think is important more than ever as well, when there's an increasing kind of ethno-nationalism perspective in the world, that we kind of keep that global perspective alive. Yeah,
and I mean, obviously, Irish people are worldwide well known for their solidarity and the fact that, you know, their history, as Christine was brilliantly explaining earlier on, you know, like the Irish history, I think, makes that deep connection with the issues that people in other countries like, you know, Palestine or even Central America are going through. And I think, it's a connection that it's very strong and it's very much welcome. I mean, not only the fact that we can, in Trócaire, for example, support the work we do, but also the political support that countries like Palestine or Central America receive over the years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Trócaire is key to upholding a lot of kind of strong advocacy in the space as well. So part of your advocacy work has involved kind of filmmaking and documentary and media. So we're going to introduce now a short piece of film. Would you like to maybe talk about it and say how it came about and what the focus is?
Yeah, the documentary is called Women in Their Place, and it's a short documentary that we did about women in Honduras who are at the front lines of the struggle to defend land and environment from exploitation by big businesses. And because of that, these women face criminalization and assault, and sadly, even murder, you know. So their courage is not just about challenging the corporate greed, but also the fact that they are challenging the system by, that tries to keep them in their place. So the film was made by a colleague of ours called McKiernan, and we're only going to show 4 minutes of the clip, but the full documentary is available on the Trocra Vimeo site. So this is part of Trocra's campaign on business and human rights, where we're calling the Irish government, the UK government, and also the European Union to take action to hold big business accountable for human rights abuse, but also for environmental damage around the world.
Great, thank you, Blanca. So we're going to bring up that snip now from the film. It's only a few minutes, and then we'll be back for a bit more conversation about that momentarily.
Located in the heart of Central America, Honduras is a country of immense natural wealth, with lush forests, fertile land, and vast mineral deposits. Despite such riches, the history of Honduras is marked by massive inequality. Today, a powerful minority control most of the land and other resources in the country, while the majority live in poverty. Since a coup in 2009, which overthrew the country's democratically elected president, this inequality has worsened. A succession of right-wing governments have made agribusiness, energy projects, and mining a keystone of the country's economic strategy, putting corporate greed above the needs of the country's poorest people. Large-scale agricultural and mining projects have led to environmental destruction, violent evictions, and the denial of basic human rights. Those most impacted are often Honduras indigenous communities who for centuries have faced discrimination and the dispossession of their ancestral lands. Responding to ongoing abuse by big business, indigenous communities are making a stand in defense of their territories. For this, they are paying a high price. There are few places more dangerous on earth to defend land and the environment. Since the coup, more than 120 people, many of them indigenous leaders, have been murdered in Honduras for resisting land grabs and environmental damage by corporations. But this is only part of the story. The exploitation of natural resources exacerbates another deeply rooted problem in Honduras: the treatment of women. Discrimination against women is pervasive in Honduras. Women are underrepresented in political and economic spheres. Girls face significant barriers to quality education, and there are many obstacles to access proper health care. Most alarmingly, violence against women is rampant. In fact, Honduras has one of the highest murder rates of women in the world outside of a war zone. These problems are intensified, especially for indigenous women, in the context of land grabbing and resource exploitation. As corporations steal and destroy indigenous land, the dangers faced by indigenous women increase, making them particularly vulnerable to displacement, sexual violence, domestic abuse, and further impoverishment. However, Indigenous women are not simply victims of abuse. In the face of inequality, they remain resilient. In many cases, they are the ones leading the struggle to defend their land and environment from exploitation. In doing so, they not only confront corporate power, they challenge what it means to be a woman in Honduras.
Thank you, Blanca. That was very, very powerful piece of film there. And you were saying the full film is available on the Trócaire Vimeo account. So you can actually find out if you Google it, Trócaire Vimeo Women in Their Place. And we will send out the link to everybody who's registered as well and share it on the Afri Facebook page as well. I was really struck by the photos and the images at the end of these women. Like they're so, I mean, courage doesn't really even come close to what we're talking about here. It's very even hard to contemplate unless you understood the severity of the risks that they face.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, human rights defenders around the world, are at threat of losing their land or risking their lives. I mean, in fact, frontline defenders last year reported that 331 human rights defenders worldwide were killed, but most of them were killed in Latin America, and the second country is in Honduras. But in particular, women face more risks for being women. First of all, they are, they can be subject of sexual abuse, rape, but also if their husbands are put in prison or killed, it is up to them to bring the family, to keep the family together because they don't have any other resources. But they're also subject to defamation and stigmatization. I mean, one of the female human rights defenders that we accompany, she was saying, a male human rights defender obviously is at risk, but nobody says about them they are going around looking for a wife or they are prostitutes, So women face things that men don't face. And but not only from big businesses or from corporations, but sometimes even from their own community and from their partners. They are not supported from defending or getting involved in the cause, So it is a huge challenge for women. And despite that, they do it.
Yeah, absolutely. So what is the practical level of support that Trócaire offers on the ground? And then why does that matter? I mean, because you're essentially defending the defenders.
Well, we always work through local partners. And the idea is that what we've learned over the years is that we have to provide integrated support. And that means not only that they have available the tools to protect themselves and have security plans, but also all the, to cover all the angles that they could be facing. So if I mean, there are human rights defenders who are in prison, illegally detained. So we're supporting them with legal support, but also psychosocial support for them and their families and the community. We also, if need be, provide anthropological studies so that those communities who have ancestral rights to that land can gain titling to that land. And also, politically campaigning and supporting their case, not only in Guatemala, but also internationally. So if their case is heard, they might be more protected. So years ago, people wouldn't know about Honduras. And sadly, Berta Cáceres had to be killed in 2016 for people to know what the Lenca people were going through against the hydroelectric project.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people would know her name, and I saw people invoking her here. So it's good to have her memory honored and presented, Betty. Absolutely. Do you feel that? I mean, do you feel that sometimes it's you lose hope on this, or do you feel that things are moving in the right direction? And particularly, I'm interested around the prospect of a treaty on business and human rights. What are the kind of movements? Are we moving in the right direction in the grand scheme?
Well, I mean, maybe to answer your first question, yes, I do think there is more recognition around the world that indigenous people and they need to have the right to say what they want in their land, the right to protect their land and their environment, the right to be consulted by their governments and by corporations about what projects they want in their land. Obviously, it is a challenging situation, and particularly with COVID, we've seen it that many of the work of these mining or logging companies was considered essential work, despite the fact that everybody was in lockdown. But I think internationally there is more recognition, and we have had small victories that are really important. So the trial for the case of Berta Cáceres, or human rights defenders in other countries like Guatemala, Avelino Chucal, he was in pre-detention for 2 years, and he won the case, and his community was also legally supported to gain access to their land title. But in terms of a treaty, there are voluntary guidelines, and unfortunately, they are just voluntary, so not everybody respects them. So we think binding treaty would make a difference in the fact that human rights will be protected, and also there be environmental due diligence. So that governments and corporations have to respect the rights of the people, particularly indigenous peoples. So it's not, it's not an anti-business campaign. It's only that business are responsible, and that they don't do in other countries what they wouldn't do in their home country. So that there is some sort of, monitoring and respect of human rights.
Well said. Do you feel that this is something that Ireland still has the potential to take a lead on? Obviously, on the one hand, we have a strong kind of reach globally, but on the other hand, maybe we don't play that hand strong enough in the right places.
Well, I think the Irish government has an opportunity to join forces with other European countries, and now they're also working on the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights, and they have taken certain steps, but there's more that needs to be done.
Yeah, so you heard it here, folks. The pressure is required, and I guess at a local, at a national level, that's up to all of us to join, whether it be Trócaire, Afri, or individual campaigns to keep the pressure on. So Blanca, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and thank you for the great work that you're doing there on the ground. And I particularly also to just really relay our collective thanks to the people on the ground in Honduras and in all those countries around the world, that there's so many heroes that we'll never know their names, but we certainly honor them here this evening.
Thanks, Ruairí. And maybe if you allow me, I was just struck yesterday. I received, and I'm sure maybe you saw it on social media, this performance by a female Palestinian poet, that was recorded 10 years ago. And it was a very powerful performance. And at the end, the line says, "We Palestinians wake up every morning to teach the rest of the world what life is." And I just felt, it is true, obviously, about Palestine, but I think it is true about all the female and all the human rights defenders around the world, that they put their life at risk to protect their communities, to protect land, and to protect environment. And it's very much in line with what Christine was saying earlier about the heroes of the famine. I think these are the heroes of the contemporary world. So thank you to them for protecting the environment and the natural resources.
Yeah, thank you, Blanca. Okay, folks, so we're going to move along now. We're kind of running a little bit behind, but we appreciate everyone staying with us. And we may run a few minutes over, but it will be worth it. We've still a few really amazing guests and a very special one to end tonight. So don't go away. I keep referring to the time zone again. I'm trying to teach myself not to do that tonight, this evening, whatever time zone you're in. Indeed, it's hard to know what day it is sometimes in COVID time. So sometimes to put words and meaning on this reality, and particularly in these kind of existential times of questioning, sometimes we need to call on the poets. At least I do anyway. So I'm now going to call on one of our best poets, one of Ireland's best poets, Paula Meehan, and it's an absolute honour to have you here. You're in Dublin, Paula, I believe.
I'm in Dublin. It's been a beautiful May Day here, and I'm delighted to be with you. And thanks, Joe, for the invitation to come. And I've heard amazing things, terrifying things, wonderful things so far tonight. So I've brought a couple of poems along, Rory, and thanks for managing all this and doing all the tech. I was reminded listening to people that my grandmother would have, her parents would have survived the famine, and her main way of showing love was always to feed whoever came into the house, whether you wanted to eat or not. And it was her big gesture of love. But Rory, you spoke about shadow material and traumatic material. And I know that with that love, I also absorbed many silences that had no language around them. And so I'm interested in that intergenerational stuff and how we transmit it.
Paula, could I sorry, I really apologize for cutting you off so abruptly there, but there's a little bit of interference coming in from your headphones, and it's actually the movement of the headphones. So you might actually work fine without the headphones, I think, because we did a call earlier and it was fine. How's that?
Can't operate without moving.
Yeah, you're good there. Can you hear me okay now? Yeah,
perfectly.
Yeah, we're good to go. Thanks.
I'm going to go just to recap just on the trauma that I also absorbed with all that love in my childhood. I absorbed, I think, silences around shadow material. So this first poem that I'll say is called Sister Trauma, and it's fairly recent. Sister Trauma brings me sage and dittany, brings me blue flowers, sits by my side in the blue hours. The cursed path of my star for the misbegotten, her humours, her transits, her simples forgotten, shows me the mountain as medicine chest, says to walk this earth is to be twice blessed, once blessed in being, once blessed in naming, shields of grace against historical shaming. McCutcher, Mr. Grieve, Culpepper, Gallon, dog-eared old herbals of dear worts and dear balms and dear banes. She takes me by the hand to the very edge, her mysteries of cliff, of river, of littoral, of hedge. Sister Trauma offers me no choice. The grave's long silence, her compensatory voice. So that's Sister Trauma. So because most of the work I've made has come out of those silences. And so these are poems that are written in gratitude to those things that are transmitted and that fire you to do things to try and ameliorate them. So I'll finish with this poem. It's called Home, and I wrote it as a kind of comalia to honor the singers and the musicians who, no matter what we're suffering, have found the song lines to help us through. So Home. I am the blind woman finding her way home by a map of tune. When the song that is in me is the song I hear from the world, I'll be home. It's not written down and I don't remember the words. I know when I hear it, I'll have made it myself. I'll be home. A version I heard once in Leitrim was close, a wet Tuesday night in the Shanrelig bar. I'd come for the session, I stayed for the vision and lore. The landlord called time, the music dried up, the grace notes were pitched to the dark. When the jukebox blared out, I'd only 4 senses and he left me senseless. I'd no choice but to take to the road. On Grafton Street in November, I heard a mighty sound. A travelling man with a didgeridoo blew me clear to Botany Bay. The tune too far back to live in, but scribed on my bones. In a past life I must have been kangaroo, rocked in my dream time, convict ships coming o'er the foam. In the puzzle factory one winter, I was sure I was home. The talking in tongues, the riddles, the rhymes struck a chord that cut through the pharmaceutical haze. My rhythm, catatonic, I lulled myself back to the womb. My mother's heart beating, the drum of herself and her world. I was tricked by her undersong, just close enough to my own. I took then to dancing. I spun like a dervish. I swear I heard the subtle music of the spheres. It's no place to live but out there in space on your own, hung aloft the night. The tune was in truth a mechanical drone. I was a pitiful monkey jigging on cue. I came back to earth with the land to rain on my face, to sun in my hair, and grateful too. The wise women say you must live in your skin, call it home, no matter how battered or broken, misused by the world, you can heal. This morning a letter arrived on the 9 o'clock post, the Department of Historical Reparation, and who did I blame? The nuns, your mother, the state. Tick box provided, we'll consider your case. I'm burning my soapbox. I'm taking the very next train, a citizen of nowhere, nothing to my name. I'm on my last journey, though my lines are all wonky. They spell me a map that makes sense, where the song that is in me is the song I hear from the world. I set down my burden and sleep, the spot that I lie on at last, the place I'll call home. So thank you, Rory, and thank you everyone listening in for this chance to be with you virtually. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Paula. There's a lot of rounds of applause going around the world for you right now. That was truly powerful. Thank you.
Pleasure.
It's incredible. Thanks so much, Paula. So Paula mentioned wise women in the poem there, in their last one, and we're really truly fortunate to have so many wise women as part of this event tonight, and indeed in activism in general. I'm getting a lot of comments in from the YouTube feed, a lot of praise for Blanca and the work that Troca are doing in Honduras. I won't be able to get to them all, but I put some of them up on screen now. You'll get to see, and a lot of praise coming in for Paula as well. People very moved by that poetry. Thank you, Paula. And yeah, it feels like a lot of people are feeling rightfully uplifted. Obviously, we're in difficult territory with the subject matter of this evening and some of the issues that are brought up. So, but I think that's the beauty of strong, coherent, cohesive, holistic activism, that it can hold the light in the dark and not fear the dark as such. And another wise woman, we're going to be going to the hills of Donegal now. I'm going to invite on Rose Kelly, who's a great friend of Afri. She's a teacher. She's an activist. Can I say a veteran activist now? Are you okay with that term?
Yeah, I think you can, Mary. It's been a while.
Yeah, because I first came across you, Rose, I believe, with the FEC campaign in Derry many years ago, maybe 15 years ago or more. They were going to build, anyway, Raytheon weapons, part of the peace process. Tragic, and you won eventually.
Yeah. That's right. It's been a while.
And you've obviously seen not just the part of the world you're in is showing it's very close to dairy, obviously. So you experienced the dairy kind of organizing culture there as well. Can you talk to me about FEC and what you feel was so special about that campaign, and how do you feel it kind of came to pass to be successful in the end?
About FEC?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I suppose, yeah, where I'm sitting now, where I'm literally, if I look over my computer, I'm looking out at Lough Foyle, and Lough Foyle is I suppose the artery that joins Donegal and Derry. So we're a natural hinterland. Derry is just up the road, as you say, and yeah, FEC started about, my gosh, it was actually, if I have to go back to, it was actually Afri and Children of Crossfire were really seeded FEC, because they held a conference in the Trinity Hotel in Derry about the victims of the arms trade, and I remember hearing about it through Afri and going in to attend the event, and just I don't know if the event was organized prior to the announcement of the arms company Raytheon going to become to Derry, or if it was just coincidence. But in any case, when we went in, we heard, right, okay, Raytheon is supposed to be coming to Derry. There was outrage. A slot had been cleared in the conference for Raytheon to attend, but they sent their apologies. They could get no one to come along, which spoke volumes. but actually, it was amazing, because there was a huge lesson to be learned there, because in that vacuum, a conversation was opened, and the invitation was put out that if anyone wanted to get involved in the campaign to oppose the coming of Raytheon in the wake of the Good Friday Agreement and the peace agreement, and it was heralded as part of the dividends of peace, and the mind boggles in that, but that we should stay behind. So I thought, I'm going to stay behind. And there was a kind of a very informal meeting. I remember we sat in a circle and we said, do we want to bring this forward? We said yes. I think that was in the July maybe time. And it wasn't until really the next January of, I think it was 2000, that FEC actually came into being and got a name, the Foyle Ethical Investment Campaign. And FEC also, of course, to see, so it's about seeing clearly. And funny, some of the FECers met up last week, and we're thinking about, right, do we get going again now or not? But we were talking about, right, what was special about the campaign? And I think there were a lot of things. One was, I think, there was a real strong sense of community. There was like a good relation. There was respect. There was a diversity. There was a real focus. There was creativity, and there was boldness. We weren't afraid to cross the line when it needed to happen. And from a FEC point of view, we were always completely non-violent, and we were consistent. I mean, for me, one of the most powerful actions that we took was on a monthly basis. Every month for several years, we dug a symbolic grave outside the Raytheon plant, and it was in commemoration of the victims of Raytheon weapons and of all weapons of mass destruction. And we used to hold vigil there, and that was really powerful. And it opened up a lot of conversations with passers-by, and also even with security people at the company and PSNI people. So it pushed boundaries in a non-violent way. Yeah.
Wow, that's powerful. I think you said you weren't afraid to cross boundaries. Like ultimately you weren't afraid to get arrested in many ways, and like I suppose civil disobedience or non-violent direct action was a part of it, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, I know that the effect, like we occupied the council offices, and we did lots. Yes, civil disobedience was part of it. No, we weren't responsible for the actual occupation of the Raytheon plant. That was the Derry Anti-War Coalition. But definitely, yeah, civil disobedience was very much a part of where we were at, and a lot of street theatre, a lot of invisible theatre. a lot of education work, art, use of humor, even. Yeah. So
Yeah,
I think
so often we kind of forget about the importance of creativity and art and indeed humor in the public engagement aspect.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm thinking as well, an image came into my head there of one of our FEC members. We were just thinking about her there on 13th. She passed away 10 years ago, and another FEC member had posted up a photograph of her at one of the activities that we carried out, where we painted a mural on the side of Badger's Wall in Derry, and that as well. The process, it took a week or more to paint it. And again, so many people came along and asked us, what are you doing and why are you doing it? And it was a way of raising awareness. And then you basically left the story painted on the wall, which was a challenge and an invitation.
Yeah.
And we also put up a 3-dimensional mural on the back of Free Derry Wall, which had a missile coming through it. And it was to connect, instead of inviting arms companies in as part of the dividends of peace, we should remember our history, not just in the north of Ireland, but in all of this island, and use it to basically inspire solidarity with people who are being oppressed all over the world today, as Afri do. So that's what we were.
It's a great example of the campaign, absolutely. And so you're back. Well, you never stopped really, Rose, but I'm aware at the moment that your particular interest in mining and extractivism and building an all-Ireland kind of network around that. And it was only today that, it was you that kind of made me aware of certain happenings. And then today, suddenly, it was as if the algorithm had invaded my computer, and suddenly I had a sponsored ad on my Twitter for a gold mine in the north, telling me how wonderful the gold mine was going to be.
Yeah.
I'm sure. And the question is, who's it going to be wonderful for, and what risks does extractivism pose at particularly this juncture for ecology on our planet?
Yeah, well, at the minute, I'm a member of a community group called Save Inishowen from Gold Mining, and it was set up just within the last year during lockdown, in response to us becoming aware that Arkle Resources, who've been on Inishowen since 2016 prospecting, were due to renew their license in April of this year. So we felt, right, now is the time we need to get in there and stop that renewal. And actually the renewal date, well, the closing date for objections was just there last week. So we're waiting to hear, has the license been renewed or not? But whenever we set up that, that's kind of the latest in literally decades of campaigns to keep the miners and keep the prospectors out of Inishowen and out of Donegal. That every few years there's a new set of licenses applied for. So this was just the latest in a long run, and I think Inishowen and Donegal are similar to all over this island. And whenever
carry on, Rose.
Right, yeah. When we set up the group, we went to our good neighbours across in the Sperrins, Save Our Sperrins, who are brilliantly basically taking on Dalradian, who want to basically set up a mine camp and they call it that in the Sperrins. It's horrendous. But they are fantastic, and they've been a great support to us. And also we went to Friends of the Earth in Belfast because we knew that they had a strong anti-mining campaigner there, Linda Sullivan. And through those two organisations, we came into contact with other communities around the country who are campaigning similar to us against either mining applications or prospecting applications. And it became clear that there were many around the country and working largely in isolation, and in the same boat as ourselves, where every few years there was a new round of applications. And we thought, right, let's talk. So we organised a meeting, and Joe from Afri came along, and And immediately he offered the support of Afri, which we're very grateful for. And we put forward the idea, right, do we want to form an All-Ireland network? And there was unanimous, yes, we do, because we subscribe to the old Irish saying, Níart go Curlicala, together we're strong. And so we formed a network, and the network is Communities Against Invasive Mining. But those initials, CAIM, spell out, some people here might know, an ancient Celtic tradition of the Kaim, which is a circle of protection, a sanctuary. And can I just say, before I say anything else, that tonight, on behalf of Save a Nation from Goldman and from Kaim, we want to send our love and solidarity to the people of Palestine, in particular Gaza, and that we extend in our hearts that circle of protection, and we hope that the onslaught of violence ceases very quickly, and we ask for their protection.
Hear, hear. Well said, Rose. Thank you. Rose, like you're obviously a teacher as well. You're working with young people. You're working in the community. You're working at different levels of engagement and different generations as well. Like, you know, obviously the last year or two have been like there's no doubt we're at a certain turning point, you know, for humanity and for ecology and humanity's relationship with ecology. Where are you drawing hope and strength from at the moment, and how do you see a brighter vision emerging from this turning point?
Yeah, God, there's so much to say on all of that. You know what I mentioned that, you know, we talk about in Kaim, Níart go Curlicala. It's something I think that a lot of Irish people, a lot of organizations would subscribe to. And you know, when I was thinking and talking about that, the Níart, that strength is not just, it's very important, it's among the people. But when you listen to people in the communities around Ireland, whether it's the anti-mining communities or any other kind of community activism, you know, organizations standing up for the earth or standing up for the communities, for human rights, for earth rights, there is a connection. There's an inspiration because of a love for the landscape, for the mountains, for the rivers, for the sea. And I have no scientific proof for this, but I firmly believe with all my heart that whenever we present ourselves and we say, I stand with the sea, I stand with the mountains, I stand with the rivers, I stand with the land, then all that, the strength of those mountains, the rivers and the land and the sea is with us. That's all we need to do, is to show up and say, we're here, because we are part, we're all one, we're part of the oneness. And I find great hope and great inspiration from that. I think the earth is just waiting for us to wake up. I'd also get, I think, a lot of inspiration from the children that I teach, and I firmly believe that now, maybe more than ever before, it's always been the case that children with their pure hearts, and before we grow up and get caught into systems, that their instincts are just absolutely spot on, and their connection with the oneness, with the big heart, is spot on. But now more than ever, I am blown away by the things that children are coming forward with, and by their passion for the earth, and by their wanting to do things. One of my only nephews was saying to his mum, if there's such a thing as a job where you can work in the forest and look after animals, because that's what I want to do.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, so and there's just, so I would get hope from that. And Joanna Macy's work, the work that reconnects, which is basically drawn in response to the catastrophe that we now find ourselves in with the climate and the biodiversity emergencies. But she talks about there are three dominant stories running concurrently. One is the business as usual story, where we just pretend there's nothing wrong and we keep extracting and consuming and destroying, which is not, it's just going to end in disaster. The second one is the great unraveling, which many of us activists would talk about the terrible damage that has been done, and how terrible it all is. And that's a story that needs telling. But the third story is the one where I find the great hope, and it's the story of the great turning, where you say, right, okay, things are bad, they are really bad, we see it, we name it, we face it, but now's the time. Now's the time to change. Now's the time when the old systems are crumbling. Now's the time to, as Afri have said in an event a few years back, occupy the imagination. Do you know? Not just imagine what it would be like, but live the kind of life, the kind of world, the kind of communities that we want to live, that are in harmony with the earth. So yeah, that's
Brilliant.
kind of to go on and on, but
well, a lot of people do want you to go on and on, Rose. There's somebody saying they could listen to you all night. I think lots of people could, but we do have another guest to get to. Rose, that was beautiful, wonderful. Thank you so much. I think you captured something very special there, and something very hopeful, and something to work towards. And I think you've given a lot of people a great lift there. I'm just going to see a comment coming in from Liam. I think Liam's a Donegal man himself. He's exiled to the Midlands, but so thanks, Rose. Getting a lot of comments coming in, indeed, for all the guests and speakers and musicians. So thanks again, Rose, and we look forward to hopefully seeing you in Mayo. I
hope so. Definitely. Thanks for having us, Ruth.
Thank you. Okay, folks, so we're almost there. We're almost at the very end, and I want to say a huge thanks to everyone. I want to say special thanks to Raj Whelan, who's going to kill me now when he sees what I'm about to do. I'm going to put him on screen. He didn't expect that, but Raj is helping me out behind the scenes here, and he's also out styling me with his hair and his lovely jumper. So thanks, Raj. And he's a great musician as well, so check out Raj Whelan. He has a band called the Raj Light as well, and his own solo stuff. So thanks, Raj, and thanks to Larissa behind the scenes in Afri as well, and obviously Joe and everyone at Trocra and all the Afri funders, donors, supporters. And obviously, I don't need to tell you too much about it, but it's been a very difficult year fundraising-wise for a lot of civil society, non-profits, campaign groups, particularly those that can't get out on the streets and have their normal events. So donations, many of you did donate when registering, so huge thanks for that. And many of you do donate regularly or whenever you can as well. And if you do feel inclined after this event, it's afri.ie /donate, and that would be hugely appreciated by the team. It's a very small, nimble team, and Afri remain, in my eyes, I suppose, one of the more courageous organizations that aren't afraid to say what needs to be said. And the independence is critical in that, and your support in helping fuel that is vital. So that's the money bit out of the way, but and I'm going to bring on stage Joe in a second, but I want to say a very special thanks also to all our guests. Christine Kinealy in Connecticut, thank you so much. To Brídín, Blanca Blanco, Paula, Rose, just everybody involved. If I'm missing anyone, Joe's going to hopefully bail me out in a second. And yeah, I'll just hand it over to him now for a few closing words.
Yeah, well, Rory, I suppose the only one left out is yourself, and really grateful again. I think you took us on a tour de force there, an amazing evening of inspirational talks and incredible music. And I suppose what it brings home to me again, as I've taught so often, is the power of An Gorta Mór. You know, that incredibly negative, devastating experience in our history, but the power that has to inspire, particularly the survivors of An Gorta Mór, you know, to take on issues that face us in the world today. Shocking stories of injustice that we heard about from Blanca Blanco and from Rose there as well in her own country, and of course what's happening in Palestine. You know, so really remembering and solidarity, and they're the two words that we keep on repeating in Afri, and really that's what it's about. So a fantastic evening, a fantastic gathering of the clans and the tribe from in Ireland and around the world, and you know, as I say, we're not able to be in Dulac this year. Maybe people will do it at their own time and their own way, or do their own walks. And as I say, if you can do that in solid or with Afri, we'd be very happy to support you in that. So I don't think there's much more to say. Just thank our funders, Trócaire, Irish Aid, Concern, the Irish Quaker Faith in Action. The presentation says there's many groups have supported us, but mostly the people who have joined us tonight and other individuals who keep on and consistently support us over the years. So thanks to them. Thanks for everyone for joining us on a Saturday evening. And thank you, Rory, for hosting this event so brilliantly, really.
Absolute honor, Joe. Thank you so much. And
can I mention, Rory, one thing? Maitet, a friend of ours from the Philippines, is in the sideline waiting. We were hoping to have a word with her. We didn't manage it for time.
If you want to take 30 seconds or 6 seconds, say hello. If she's there, I can bring her on screen.
There, Maitet, come in. Can you bring her in for a second?
Here.
Maitet, lovely to see you.
Oh, sorry.
I can't quite see her.
Here you are.
Hello,
lovely to see you, Maitet. We remember you leading the walk. I think it was 2016. You gave a powerful speech, and it's on the Afri YouTube channel. So tune into the Afri YouTube channel and the 2016.
2015, Joe.
2015. Sorry, Maitet.
Yes.
Yeah, so good to see you, and still doing the good work.
Thank you, Joe. And I really just wanted to say very briefly, Joe, that on the road of remembrance along the Famine Trail of Tears, Afri has really built amazing bridges of solidarity, shining light and calling our attention to all the injustices in the world, from Palestine to the Philippines. And, we've had amazing campaigns with Afri, together with Afri, all throughout, the 30 years or more. I mean, I've known Afri for 38 years, Joe, so there you are.
Well.
So, but, it's also like, just reminding us all of our common humanity and our shared defiance against inequality, our commitment to build hope for a just and better world. More power to Afri.
Brilliant. Thank you, Maitet. What a lovely way to finish. Over to you, Rory.
Thanks, Joe, and thanks, Maitet. That was a great burst of energy from her. So thanks. So I'm going to fly the Cavan flag here. I'm originally from Cavan myself, Coot Hill, and we're going to head over to a fellow Cavan person, to the wonderful folk singer, musician, Lisa O'Neill, to sing us out this evening. So let's take the songs with us. Let's take the spirit, the stories with us, and let's all meet on the road in Dulac Valley next year, if not before, and look after each other, and let's keep rising and standing and speaking and keeping the flame alive. So thanks again, everyone. Thanks for all your wonderful comments and shares. Let's go to Lisa O'Neill.
Good evening, virtual famine walkers. I'm honoured to be joining you this evening for this very important commemoration. I'm going to sing you a song called As I Roved Out. I learned it from listening to Andy Irvine singing it. I believe it was collected in Fermanagh. During the famine and after the famine, it was quite common for a man to choose the lassie who had the land over the lassie that he loved. And I think it's well depicted in this here song. As I roved out on a bright May morning to view the meadows and flowers gay, whom should I spy when my own true love as she sat under yon willow tree. I took off my hat and I did salute her. I did salute her most courageously. When she turned around, well, the tears fell from her, saying, "False young man, you have deluded me." A diamond ring I own, I gave to you. A diamond ring to wear on your right hand, but the vows you made, lo, you went and you broke them, and married the lassie that had the land. If I married the lassie that had the land, my love, it is that I rue until the day I die. When misfortune falls, no man can shun it. I was blindfolded, I ne'er denied. And at night, when I go to my bed of slumber, the thoughts of my true love run in my mind. When I turn around to embrace my darling, instead of gold, sure, it's brass I find. And I wish the Queen would call home her armies from the West Indies, America and Spain, and to every man and his wedded woman, in hopes that you